can you all talk about studies done and your writing, right? Can you talk about the schedule that you maintained with writing of the final product and kind of what that looked like? Because I too would like to get this thing done as soon as possible, right? So if I'm, starting that writing process this summer, then, what kind of schedule should I aim to try to maintain in order to make sure that that's done in the timeline that I'd like it to be done?
For me, so because I had 10 cohorts that are looking at chapter 4, I think chapter 4 is going to be your hardest chapter to write. Partially because it becomes so repetitive that it's dry reading. Let's be candid.
Right.
But for me, it was like, okay, I've done 5 different analyses for each cohort, and so I broke it down into chunks. And I would say, okay, today I'm going to write about the first and the second analysis that I did for cohort 1. And then on the second day, I'd write the other 3 for cohort 1. Once I had done cohort 1, because I did the same kind of analysis for each of the cohorts, then I could go in and I could pretty much chunk out 2 through 10 pretty quickly. And then once you've written all of your results, then you take the discussion of those results into chapter 5. So as I was writing the results, then the way that I just set up just the formatting of my document was I had my proposal chapters 1 through 3, and then I had a separate document for 4 and a separate document for 5, and then I just combined them. So as I was writing chapter 4, then if I had something come to mind about, oh, this is part of the discussion that I want to do in chapter 5, then I would just go to that particular section in chapter 5 and make those notes.
Right.
So it was a matter of chunking it out. And you have to look at whatever timeline you and your with in terms of, okay, I want to see chapter 4 in 2 weeks, or I want to see chapter 4 in a month. Whatever timeline you agree to, then you kind of take a broad look at your data and say, I know that I'm going to need to write X number of pages, and then I just divided that up across the amount of time that I had. So if I had, let's go with 2 weeks, if I had 14 days or 15 days to respond, and I knew that each of my chapters up to this point was approximately 30 pages, then I knew that I needed to write 2 pages a day. And if you have a month, then 30 pages is your average length, then you're going to need to write a page a day. So for me, just kind of keeping that chunking in mind really helps me focus my writing.
I would, I think the classes can help you with this. Sure. Discover what works for you.
Yeah.
Because for me, I've been told I'm a weird writer, like the way I approach it. But I think it works for me.
Right.
It works for the way my brain works. So my style is, if I have key expressions, like key sentences or something, I capture those. Like I literally physically write them down. And those become the start of paragraphs, transitions, and I'll go grab those later because they're kind of like key thoughts. But the rest of it, I kind of need the data and the findings to simmer. And then so what I might do is start an outline.
Yeah.
And then I may simmer for weeks, and then I'll binge write. And everybody's like, that's terrible. You got to write an hour a day. You have to have this discipline. It's like, no, that doesn't work for me. Because I tend to be really passionate about whatever I'm doing in the moment. So I'll write for a whole day until my brain just goes mush. And I'll just stop when I can't think straight anymore. And then I'll go back and clean a little bit of it up. And I'll do that again. So that's probably not advisable, but it works for me.
But when you were doing that, you know, you step away from it, right, and you come back to it, and when you're in that kind of writing mode, what was that schedule like for you? I mean, you're saying
It's
that you were
manic.
writing all day long. Was it like for
Yes.
weeks on end? It was
No.
all day?
No. Like, I could write 15 pages in a day.
Sure.
I mean, nuts.
Yeah.
But if I had to write a page a day for 15 straight days, I would not be in it.
Okay.
And I wouldn't do it.
Okay. So you might do that for 2-3 days-ish, and then go back and into the revision.
Yeah, or maybe skip a day, whatever my
Yeah.
brain needed to,
Yeah.
like, reset.
Yeah.
Because there is a
Okay.
point when you do that,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
lose it. Like,
Right.
it starts reading like garbage.
right.
So I've learned to recognize, okay, this is starting to go south quickly, so stop.
So you just need to step away and
Mhm.
recharge and yeah,
And
I get
I'm
that.
in the middle of writing a book right now, so I'm going through that process.
Uh-huh.
And the person I'm writing it with is like, Rob, are you doing anything? Are you doing anything? And I'm telling him, I'm researching, I'm letting it percolate, and then all of a sudden, I'll have 60 pages for you. And sure enough, this week
Okay.
I'm like, hey, I got 60 pages for you. And then you have to kind of move stuff around and make sense of it, but that's just my style.
Yeah.
So I think everyone has a different approach.
Sure.
Is it probably for most people smarter to do the chunk away? Yeah. But if you're nuts like me, you have to think about what works for you.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of it's just your brain, how it processes information and how it gets information out.
Well, for me, it was I fell in love with my data, all of it. I wanted it all, and my first version of Chapter 4 was enormous. So going back through sorting that out, I guess I got in the habit of writing every day while I was gathering data. I was writing all the time, gathering data, reflexive memos, that sort of thing, observations, doing all this other stuff. And then when I got down to the point, I was used to thinking kind of the way Rob was thinking. I was getting this data together, but I really hadn't simmered it down enough. And when I got to the writing part of it, I wanted to try and get this out in a very limited amount of time, and I was really under the gun to do that. We had a very tight writing schedule there for a while, and it moved it forward a great deal, but it wasn't ready yet because, like Rob mentioned, you got to step away from it sometimes. It just you look at it so long and you think, okay, this is great, but no, it's not. It's kind of going in a direction you don't want it to. So what helped me the most with that refining process was to actually step back and take a break away from it. Say, I'm not going to meet this deadline, but that's okay. I don't have to. I can step away from this and come back to it. So I took, actually after all that intense writing, I took about 2 weeks off. And I said, I'm not looking at it for 2 weeks. And I just did things to re-energize and refresh. And then when I looked back at it after the 2 weeks were up, I was like, oh my goodness, did I really write this? And some of the things that Rob was talking about, like you write so long, you eventually begin to fall. It's not the quality you want, right? So I went back to it after that 2 weeks off and hit it hard again. And Again, at that time, I was not as intense as I was before the deadline, but I regularly looked at it every day. Did I write tons every day? No, but I looked at it all the time, and I thought about it. And over the process, it started to shape up pretty
Sure.
well.
Can I ask you a question about your memoing that you did? Because I too am doing some qualitative stuff. So, did you have someone else, or was there someone else involved, kind of a peer reviewer in that memoing process? Either they look at your memos after the fact, or you're kind of thinking out loud with someone else.
Well, I shared all my memos in a box file with Dr. Latz.
Mm-hmm.
So I had those there. Every time I was memoing, I was putting it in there.
Uh-huh.
So I had this enormous file in box that had all of these memos, reflexive memos, analytical memos, observation documents, all that stuff was in there. And I also, my study was at another institution, so I had to work through another IRB to get approval to go there and do this work. And they wanted some additional documents available, and I put all those documents in there. And I basically did that for accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to have all the documents there, all of the informed consent documents, all of the IRB stuff. And so I think that was one way of doing it. But I didn't go to somebody and say, "Would you please peer review my reflexive memo?" But we talked about this on a regular basis.
But there was discussion and all that for you to kind of process
Right,
that.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
And one thing that I will say too is, one, you have to ask yourself what counts as writing.
Sure.
Sometimes it's not just fingers on keys. Sometimes it's reading and outlining. Sometimes it's going through a very monotonous coding process. I mean, you have to kind of say, okay, what counts and what am I going to do today? The other thing with regards to the memoing is you have to also ask yourself, what are these memos meant for? Are these memos a place for me to sort of air out my ideas? Are these memos data? Or what really is the purpose of these memos? And for some, the memos might be, they might be the words, the writing that becomes the actual dissertation. For some, it may be data to be analyzed and then report on within the dissertation. So it really depends on a ton of things. I mean, you could do a memo on an article that you just read. So it just depends on how you're thinking about that. But I in my own experience, I would confer with what everybody said. In my own experience, I had things I had to get done every day as I was collecting data. I was just getting ready to write, and then when writing time hit, I exactly like what Karen said, did the math, because I had to say to myself, what is about how long will this be, and what do I have now? And oh my gosh, I have 60 days to craft this, and that means I got to be hitting about 750 words a day, or whatever it might be. So that can be a really practical, good thing to say. But it's also, you also have moments when you're like, I've just had the shits of this. I got to get away from this. I'm not thinking clearly. I can't even see the world around me without seeing my dissertation. You have to just get out of it. And I would engage in periods of binge writing when I was pumping, because I took a walk or I took a run and something hit me. Always get a good idea after some aerobic exercise. Me personally, at least one good idea happens. But I would forget to do that because I'm like, oh, I have all this to do, so I wouldn't take care of myself. So there's periods of scheduled stuff, and then there's periods of asking yourself and negotiating what counts, what doesn't. I mean, I remember having days when I read an entire book only to write a paragraph, and I was like, gosh. But that's the kind of stuff that you have to do in order to understand what in the world it is that
Yeah.
you're doing. And you will forget what you're doing. You will be
Yeah.
like, wait, okay, what's my purpose statement?
And then
What are my research questions?
That's when you would pull back.
Exactly.
And,
And that's when, like Dan was saying, this conceptual congruence, the plumb line of your work, can serve as a tether when you get too far away.
Yeah.
But you forget about that when you get excited by an idea. You know, which happens to, I mean, if you're in doc school, I'm hoping that you're a curious person in general, and ideas are exciting to you, so it's going to happen. It's a very individualized process, and you always have to be cherry picking ideas from other people. I mean, I can't tell you how many books I've read about writing. I'm like, oh, this book kind of stunk, but there's one like really great idea. It's like it's not all going to work for you. So shameless plug for our writing strategy session, which is going to be next. Which I might just have to ask you to facilitate.
It is a really individual process. I think for all of the expertise seeking, and if you ever get a chance to talk to an author in your space, it's a really good idea. But you take all that in, right? You take conversations and coaching and books and articles and your chair and your committee, and you take all that information. But just like Karen said, at the end of the day, you become the expert, and it's a very creative. Researching and writing is a very creative process, and so again, it is your work, and yes, humility, listening. You listen to everything, but then you start to shape your own take on it, and I think that's that's kind of the maturity of going through the dissertation process. Is you get to that point where you say, I'm pretty comfortable, this is my work. I mean, it can always be better, always. But there's papers after the dissertation for that. But this is my creative work, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's almost that convergence where the student becomes the teacher in a small way, because kind of what Karen was talking about, that you become the expert in what you're doing, so therefore you have to inform your committee that this is the right decision and here is why.
Yes.
You know, where you're kind of, making that transition in a
Can y'all talk about the relationship that you had to have during this process with your committee chair? Like how often you communicated, what did you communicate about? If you don't mind, just so that we can get a sense of like what is that going to look like for us, or what should that look like?
I'm sure it was different for Dan and Karen and I, and even Karen and I, I'm sure it was a little bit different. But because we both had Dr. Wessel and you had Dr. Lass, and so for me, I remember Dr. Wessel saying early on, he said, I just want, so you understand, a dissertation chair and doctor student relationship can be really love-hate.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him at the end, I said, you told me that and I remembered it, but I don't agree with it. I said I loved every minute of this. You held me accountable, you pushed me, you congratulated me every step of the way. There was never any hate for me personally. Were there times where I was just a little poked, like the bear was a little poked because the bear's tired and sick of this? Yeah, but it was pretty easy to reframe and say, just trying to help, and he's actually been extremely helpful, and just the knowledge of, the veteran side of this, where they've been through this and they know how to coach you along. So for me, I found the relationship is like just respect and listen, and you're still going to do your own thing on occasion, right? You're still going to make some of your own decisions, but if it's too far off, they're going to hard push you back to that plumb line. So I found it to be one of the professional relationships I've ever had.
Was it like weekly, or more monthly communications, or primarily email or face to face?
There are lapses depending on where you're at in the stage, but then there are times where it's like every day almost, you know, and sometimes you're like, I'd like to hear from you a little more, and it's not their fault. They understand patience and that, hey, this will work out, and that they have other things on their plate too. But I would say that it depends on where you're at in the process. It's kind of like, for me, you know how you're texting someone and there's a point where someone just pushes dial, like they call you, and they say, that's enough texting, we need to talk. Wessel would do that to me sometimes, like, okay, we've sent enough emails back and forth, we need to just talk. And then it would go the next step, the more intimate step of, you need to come to my office, let's get face to face on this. So I think it depends on the need, and that was my experience.
For me, Dr. Wessel pretty much gave me free reign. I probably communicated with him when I was doing my classwork, maybe once or twice a semester. And usually it was me going in saying, can I add this to my program plan?
Lifelong learner, right?
Oh, yeah. And he'd say, does this distract you from your final goal? And I'd say, actually, it helps me get there. And he'd say, okay. So that was kind of what we did for my multiple years of coursework. Once I got to the proposal and dissertation stage, again, probably once or twice a semester. Mostly it would be me feeling guilty that I hadn't corresponded with him and told him what I was actually up to recently. And so I'd say, this is my somewhat overdue progress report. And he would respond saying, it's lovely to hear from you. I'm glad to hear things are going well. So we, Dr. Wessel and I became good friends, as well as him being the chair of my committee and my advisor. Probably because we're close to the same age, probably because I had some personal stuff going on that kind of delayed my progress, and when that started going on, he was like, you know what, I can tell that you aren't in a strong position right now. This was around the time that I was to take my comprehensive exams, and he said, you're a strong student, you're a strong scholar, I don't want you going into your comprehensive exams and doing anything less than I know you're capable of, so let's postpone. I think that's the point at which we transitioned from the, advisor student to becoming friends, because he was so in tune with what I emotionally needed at that point in time that he said, you plan to finish in 6 years, we've got 7. If you need to take some time off to deal with this other stuff that's going on in your life, that's okay. And that really helped me process what I needed to process so that I could get back to the point of finishing strong. And I have to say that my comprehensive exams were probably the most traumatic part of my entire experience. But that's a story for another day. Just, for me, Dr. Russell became a dear friend. And I recognize that that's not going to be the case for a lot of students. But I think knowing that your chair has your best interests in mind and they want to see you walk, they don't want to see you become ABD and never finish. Just kind of keep that in the back of your mind all the time, no matter what it is that they are saying to you and how it is they phrase it, because it may be that the way that they phrase it isn't the kindest, but it's always with your best interest.
Well, for me, it was a little bit different than either Karen or Rob. I think I had an advantage. Number one, I was working with Dr. Latz, who was my committee chair. And because of that work relationship, there was a lot more communication. Periodically, there would be breaks in that communication where, especially during field work, I mean, that was a gap of time, but we had other projects in the works, and because of that, we regularly were communicating about those other projects as well. And there was also the sense of, okay, let's go through what we're talking about, either by email or in person or on phone. And then, by the way, how is the dissertation process? Where are you at with that? And like both Rob and Karen said, there were times when I had to be prodded along. I needed to have a push. I needed to be challenged. I needed to be. There were a couple of times in the writing process where I met with Dr. Latz and she says, "I know that you are better than this in your writing," and that challenged me. I was like, "Okay, I want you to. This is not where you can be." And I think that's what Rob and Karen both mentioned, is that your chair will push you to be the best that you can because they know what you're capable of. And because of our working relationship, I think that happened very well, and I really appreciated all of that. But I also think having that working relationship was an advantage to me because there was a process where what you're doing in other places bleeds into what you're doing on the dissertation. I don't know if that makes sense, but all this other work we were doing wasn't isolated work or isolated projects. That work really helped me to find my focus in my dissertation as well. So I think I had a bit of an advantage there. Well, I did have an advantage, but I think that whatever situation you're in, the chair is going to be, like both Karen and Rob said, very interested in you doing, keeping you where you can be. They know what you can do, so, and they want you to succeed, and that's the message that came to me through the whole process. We want you to do this. We want you to succeed.
It takes some serious discipline to, I think, have the kind of relationship, like whether it's Dr. Latz, Mulvihill, or Wessel, where you can be held accountable, but be a friend. And that's really, from what I've heard across the country, that's really unique to this program. And I think, that's a great thing to take away. So I'm really glad I chose this because it's pretty unique. And I think what you heard from all three of us was we got really close to our professors in our program, but then our chair especially. So
Yeah, it was a very professional relationship, but it was a relationship that I enjoyed. I looked forward to.
question.
What other questions do we have?
I had a couple of notes of knowledge. I've only done IRB process once, and I heard several of you say that you had changes as you were writing. So, what kind of changes did you have to go back and review IRB? Or do you write IRB a little broader so that those changes come?
Yeah, for me, IRB was probably the most stressful piece of the whole thing, only because I defended my dissertation in maybe, do you remember, like something. October, probably October, late October of last year, and I had to get the IRB going so that I could collect data starting in January. And I had to rely on that office to turn it through. And so I made a few annoying phone calls over there and said, here's my circumstances, and coach me along so that I'm giving you what you want that fits what I need. And I, the turnaround, and Wessel was kind of like, I could tell he was being serious, not just being dramatic. Like, is this going to take? But it was turned around in a week, and they had one little question. I tweaked it. We had one other little discussion about something like in January. Decided not to change it because once you have it, it's kind of with it. But I don't know. Yours was a little more complicated. Yours was qualitative. They tend to scrutinize qualitative a little more. At least I think they do. Because you're going to be talking to people and being close with people. But I think by that time you don't have a lot of changes. But I think getting through it, it's like getting that stamp of approval is the stress point, especially when you have a tight timeline.
Well, mine was exempt from IRB because I was doing secondary data analysis. I wasn't doing any direct human contact. So mine was pretty much a formality. In fact, I was told I didn't even need to submit, but because we want to make sure we have all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed, you submit anyway. And, once you get that, you're exempt. It's like, okay, I just got a free walk in the park.
My study was a little bit more complicated, not by Ball State's IRB. Ball State IRB was the easy part. The institution I went to, I had to work with their IRB, and after getting the Ball State approval, any changes that IRB wanted me to make, I needed to communicate with the Ball State IRB. So I don't think it was I did not think the Ball State IRB process was difficult at all. I think that they were very helpful and supportive. The issue that I had was trying to make sure that the other IRB matched up with Ball State, and any changes they wanted me to make, I wanted to communicate with our IRB here. So they would be apprised, that situation. I think I may have had 2 items that I had to communicate with them and request a slight adjustment, but that was it.
And you don't always have to get IRB from the other institution. That's just
Right.
depends on
It depends on what the data is that you're doing, yeah.
and their standards.
And they might not even have an IRB.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And I just had to get a permission letter I collected data at here, and then at Missouri, Kansas City, and University of South Alabama. And I just had to get a letter from the department I was collecting data in back to here, and they didn't require anything, and that was all Ball State wanted. So that varies from school to school and how it's handled. So.
Let's say, for example, that you go down the path of, this is completely arbitrary, but let's say you're doing a qual study and you assert in your IRB application, I am doing ethnography. And then as you get down the path, you've collected your data, you've adhered to ethnographic methods, but you realize that you're actually doing phenomenology. Even if you change your methodology, if your methods remain the same, the IRB is not worried that you made that shift. What they would be concerned about are things like, well, I started out interviewing individuals 18 years of age and older. Now I'm going to start interviewing children. That would be a reason to,
Or you start with just interviews and then you move to doing observations as well.
Yes. So you would have to make some significant methods level changes to warrant an IRB modification. And the IRB has gotten at least at our institution, a little bit more lenient on sort of what you can change without needing a modification. So let's say, for example, I'm going to interview a range of 17 to 25 people, and you end up interviewing 28 people. You don't have to tell the IRB that you're doing that. You have to think for yourself, am I like overburdening the population or the sample? You have to make those kinds of questions. Have I already achieved data saturation? Do I really need to do this? But the IRB isn't worried about that level of a change. What they are worried about is protecting research participants and making sure that you are acting in ethical, do no harm kinds of ways as a researcher. Because conceivably you could get sued, and the institution needs to have that that sort of sense of security that this work has been vetted, and that you've done what you've needed to do to the best of your ability, and so have they as an institution. Does that make sense, Mary? So you can make little twists and turns and not notify the IRB, but if it's something significant.
Key thing that she said was methods.
Yes.
It's all about methods. That's really what they care about. It's how are you going to go in? What questions are you going to ask? Who are you asking them of? And here's a piece of advice. I would highly suggest that you engage in an IRB process in one of your class research studies. Even if you don't need to, I would do it so that you've been through the process, because it's a lot less intimidating the second and third and fourth time. And it starts to make sense, like, I see what they really want now. Because you do have to swim through a lot of stuff, but it's not that big of a deal. It's not as intimidating when you've been through it and you hear the questions that come back. It's like, I know what they want now. So I would highly suggest that you kind of suck it up in a class study and you say, you know what, I may use this data later anyway. So let's go through an IRB so we have that experience.
So I know at some point, some students go into the doc program knowing what they want their dissertation to be, and then some have no idea. Could y'all talk a little bit about what that was for you, or how you came to your idea at what point in your program?
So, I talked about how I kind of had this nebulous feeling, and then, kind of narrowed it down as I was approaching into it. I think serendipity plays a lot to do with it. I find myself constantly asking questions that could be turned into a dissertation, and I would make notes of those. I had a document called Dissertation Ideas. So I'd be in a class and we'd be talking about something, and I'd go, I wonder if you studied this particular question from this particular point of view, what your findings might be. And so making notes of all of those ideas that you have as you're sitting in the classroom. And after you've taken a few classes, you're going to start finding yourself going back to some of the same types of themes. And when you find yourself consistently interested in the same kind of thing over and over again, that's kind of a clue that maybe this would be something that you would want to be willing to live with for a couple of years, because seriously, you're going to have to live with whatever you decide is your dissertation topic for a long time. And by the end of it, you may be to the point of gag me with a spoon if somebody even mentions it. So it has to be something that you really are passionate about. And then I would just say, as you take these classes, just be open to a lot of different ideas. You may hear somebody else talking about something that goes, that might be really interesting to look at. And you kind of have a sense for the things that you are passionate about, and so start reading and thinking along those ideas, and how does it relate to the degree area that my focus is. You know, if you're in community college leadership, you know, how does this particular thing impact community college leadership? You know, what could we possibly learn? You know, if you're in higher education, how does this particular thing play a role in higher education? You know, my interest in persistence is something that higher education is really passionate about, because so many government entities are looking over our shoulder and making sure that our students are actually making progress. You know, if you're interested in business administration, you know, what kind of policies are happening in higher education that would impact administration? What kind of overlap do we see between, you know, publicly traded business and higher education? Because we see a lot of overlap these days. Those kind of questions about things that you know you're interested in and how they relate to your degree can kind of help you narrow that, you know, huge. I'm interested in everything, and you know that's where I come from. I literally, if somebody starts telling me about something, I'm going, oh, you know, tell me more. I'm interested in everything, but to get to a dissertation, you have to really take that world interest down to something that you're going to be willing to live with for a couple of years.
So that about covers it on that one. I mean, if you have something in mind from day one, I would just be open to discovery and pivoting, because you just never know. Your passions may go in a different direction. So, and it's great if you can let everything flow from day one. That may not. It may not end up working that way.
Yeah, I would echo that too, especially the part about pivoting, and the reason why is I came into the program thinking in a little bit different way than when I left, but also because some of my personal experience shaped my interests. So like I became interested in leadership change because I experienced what I call a difficult leadership change in an institution where I was working. That led to, like, it's a serendipitous process, but it led to appreciative inquiry. And then it just so happened that the person I'd read about using this was coming to Ivy Tech, and thankfully Mary invited me to this, or invited all of us to this meeting, and that was the key to me actually being able to go out to this institution and do the research. So I mean, your interest will be there, but remain open to the possibilities that might unfold.